Okay, good morning. We are just going to wait 30 seconds or so to get started with the webinar. And just as we see a lot of people joining, just thanks for your patience as we move a few more minutes or so. Hi, everyone. If you've just joined, we are waiting about another 30 seconds to get started to allow people to get logged on. A lot of people joining right now. Oh, okay. All right, now that we're at a minute past the hour, I think we can get started. So welcome everyone to this RSB webinar, Navigating RED 3, Ensuring a Smooth Transition. Today's session is designed to provide clarity, guidance, and some insights as we align with RED 3 and continue building trust and credible, transparent certification. My name is Hannah Walker. I will be your host for today, moderating the discussion and the Q&A, which will be at the end. I'm joined by 5 fantastic speakers, each bringing a different lens to this conversation around RED 3 and credible certification. Our RSB's Executive Director, Eleanor Schmidt, will contextualize the discussion both within the RSB certification system and organization, but also within the bigger picture of the credibility and assurance needed to build trust and confidence in the bioeconomy in 2025 and beyond. Then we're going to be hearing directly from both a producer, Greg Buczynski from World Energy, and an end user, Julia Fittler of Microsoft, bringing 2 important perspectives from different points in the value chain, but both equally reliant on certification systems that are robust, transparent, and fit for purpose. Then we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty with RSB's technical team, led by Standards and Certification Director Amparo Arellano and Certification Manager Federico Blanco, who are going to take us through the details of system integrity, changes under RED 3, and how RSB is aligning to meet and support these new requirements. So here's everything that we'll be covering today, starting with that welcome and some short reflections on the topic, followed by our perspectives from Greg, Julia, and then we're going to get into the technical details. We are going to wrap up with a Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions throughout the session. You should see in your top bar of your Teams window a Q&A box. If you don't see it, click more and you should find it there. We will get to the questions in a chronological order. We had quite a lot coming through yesterday, so I encourage you to share them early so that we're able to get to yours first. And without any more further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Eleanor Schmidt, our Executive Director, to set the stage for this conversation. Eleanor, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome also from my side to today's webinar on RED 3, which is, as many of us here know, already the 3rd edition of the EU Renewable Energies Directive. The first version of the RED came into force back in 2009, and some of us remember this time well, me included. I was working as an auditor, and it was really the challenge of preparing an entire sector for implementation. This was very intense and also inspiring to see it. Even then, the EU set a clear direction. Biofuels used within the Union had to meet strict sustainability criteria to count towards national renewable energy targets and to qualify for subsidies. These were really early requirements, and particularly around greenhouse gas emission calculation and verification and supply chain transparency. And it set a high bar. In comparison to other sectors, the biofuel sector became a lighthouse of good practice, standing out while all other sectors still have to catch up. RSB has been a recognized certification system from the very beginning, but it was for us always more than just meeting regulatory requirements. RSB was designed to build trust and long-term credibility in biofuels as a genuine solution in the fight against the climate crisis. Credibility here is crucial. We have to remember that If biofuels fail to demonstrate that there are real greenhouse gas emission reductions and supply chain transparency, then the entire decarbonization strategy of the transport sector is at risk. So what we'll explore today goes far beyond technical compliance. And the requirements that we show you and the structural elements that I like to talk you through are RSB's deep commitments to credibility, accountability, and continuous improvement. So looking at the RSB certification system, the most important, the core structural element that speaks about the quality of any certification system is the level of assurance that that certification system applies. RSB applies consistently the reasonable level of assurance for greenhouse gas and chain of custody data, and here we are unique in the space. We believe that especially compliance claims that entire industries build their decarbonization strategies upon require strong evidence. We do also have a formal oversight body that reviews the performance of the RSB certification bodies, and this oversight body provides feedback not just to the RSB team, to the RSB Secretariat, but also to RSB's governance, our delegates, and the board. This supports the consistency, the transparency, accountability, and implementation, as well as the continuous improvement in our system. We require that auditors are technically qualified in the areas that they are auditing. This ensures that audit findings are informed, they're accurate, and they're reliable. At RSB, also very unique in the space, every new certification application first goes through a public stakeholder consultation process. Everyone can easily sign up to our website to receive a notification about new certification applications, and everyone can comment. And these comments have to be considered by the auditors. Auditors themselves conduct a second layer of stakeholder consultation that's focused on the topics that they are auditing. This ensures transparency and brings the local knowledge and also civil society input to the process. This helps that we all together build credibility into the system. We are verified compliant with the ICEAL codes of good practice, and we are governed by a chamber system including NGOs, private sector actors, academia, and many more, ensuring balanced decision-making. For us, these are not add-ons, they are part of how credibility is built into our system by design from the very beginning. There are multiple ways that you can engage with us. We're very proud about our multi-stakeholder governance, the way that RSB is set up as an organization. Our members are all represented at the Assembly of Delegates by their chamber delegates. And the Assembly of Delegates is the body in the RSB that takes decisions on RSB standards. Members also elect the directors of the board. Of course, you're all invited to join the RSB memberships, where you have access to our working groups, to the platforms like the RSB Book and Claim platform, and to all our events. Last year, we launched the RSB Academy that is now supporting operators, auditors, sustainability professionals to learn about the certification process and the sustainability requirements RSB applies and how to implement them. Everyone can access the RSB Academy and learn about the RSB in their own time. RSB certification is transparent, stakeholder inclusive, and all these measures reduce risk and strengthen the system and all the operators that are certified by it. RSB certification sends a strong signal to regulators, to partners, to investors that your organization is committed to real sustainability and not just ticking boxes. We are ready to support you and support a smooth transition to RID3 implementation with technical recognition, with practical tools and active stakeholder support. We have received now the positive technical assessment for the RID3, and the scopes include agricultural biomass, waste and residues and co-processing, and we expect the recognition of the outstanding scopes shortly. We published revised guidance documents and system updates that are all aligned with RID3, and we actively guide participating operators through the implementation. We deliver RID3 focused training through the Academy, hosting technical webinars, and coordinate also policy recommendations via meetings with our platforms. A new one is already coming up, a coordinated joint meeting of the SAF policy platform and the Sustainable Marine Fuels platform, also looking at system integrity, chain of custody, transparency, and recommendations to bring forward to the European Commission. So our system is recognized, tools are in place, the community is engaged. We are ready to support compliance and reinforce confidence and credibility. And with this, very happy to hand back over to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Elena, for grounding us in that bigger picture and reminding us how and why credibility and trust must be built intentionally and continuously protected. And all of the ways in which the RSB certification system is ready to support operators. Now, I'm very pleased to hand over to Greg Pajinski, who is the Director of Compliance and Quality Assurance at World Energy. As a fuel producer operating directly within the certification framework, World Energy and Greg bring a valuable perspective on what it means to implement sustainability requirements on the ground and what's needed from a certification system to support confidence, consistency, and credibility. So I'm now going to hand over to Greg. Thanks so much to Greg for sharing such a clear perspective on how certification and RSB certification supports producers and turning those commitments into operational reality. Now, I'm really pleased to welcome Julia Fiedler. She's the Environmental Sustainability Lead for Fuel and Materials Decarbonisation at Microsoft. As a representative of a global end user, Julia brings a downstream perspective on why credible certification matters, not only for compliance, but for building trust in sustainability claims, supply chain transparency, and of course, climate action. We're very grateful to have her support and to have her with us to share how systems like RSB contribute to real confidence in a complex and ever-evolving landscape. Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to the RSB for inviting me to join you all today. I was really delighted to have the opportunity to speak, as it's important that an end customer such as Microsoft can really voice why we value the relationship we have with RSB and the value that the RSB certification offers within our supply chain and the work that we do. We've been working together with the RSB for a number of years. Since we first announced our ambition to become carbon negative by 2030, it became crucial that we work together with partners such as the RSB to really identify ways that we could achieve that while also addressing all of the other considerations around the transition away from fossil fuels and our sustainability work in general. We identified that the RSB's approach towards certification was credible and valid, deep and thoughtful, and that the governance towards that process provide us with confidence that when we purchased products and services, goods and fuel such as sustainable aviation fuel that was certified by the RSB, we could have confidence that the considerations and the risks had been assessed and were managed to the best of our ability. So we have continued to work on developing solutions such as environmental attribute certificates, working to develop sustainable aviation fuel and certificates, and the process that allows companies such as Microsoft to report lower emissions through supporting these transitions. And we continue to see the value and the work that RSB is enabling as really crucial to being able to stand behind those claims. So when a Microsoft or other corporate company is supporting this work, it's typically from a voluntary position, and therefore the credibility of those claims and the assessment of risk is really crucially embedded within all of that procurement process. RSB has considered to continue to provide transparent solutions that allow us to have confidence in the work that we're doing. I'd like to just end by saying that one of the important things that we see from the work that RSB does is truly transparency. And as the RSB themselves describe, transparency is not a risk, it's a requirement for trust. So I'd like to thank the RSB for the work they do and how that enables us to continue to support developments and transitions of these sustainability aviation fuels and other solutions, and to thank you all today for joining.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that wonderful message and for your continued partnership. We're really proud of our collaboration. Now, I am about to hand over to Federico and Amparo Arellano. I would just like to remind you all to please use the Q&A feature in the top bar. And then with that, Amparo, Federico, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Amparo Arellano. I'm Standards and Certifications Director in RSB. And I'll be walking you today through a brief overview of the different areas of work that we have in the RSB system with regards to system integrity to ensure the robustness and the credibility of our certification process. So the first thing I'd like to say before we go into the nitty-gritty of the different system integrity actions that we have in RSB is that we acknowledge that every economic operator that is trusting a certification scheme is already taking steps with regards to risk mitigation. So certification schemes, as you know, are per se a risk mitigation tool, and we therefore endorse the efforts that you already are seeking and implementing when you proceed with a certification process. However, in our perspective, currently the biofuels industry is going through a significant scrutiny, and we think it's our role as a certification scheme to ensure that what we deliver is true sustainability. And for this reason, we are significantly investing in the area of system integrity by implementing additional layers of due diligence and risk mitigation actions that will deliver and ensure we deliver on those impacts that we're seeking for from the RSB from a social and environmental perspective. So the first area where we are significantly investing in terms of system integrity in the RSB is with regards to due diligence. We include this in our certification process right from the beginning, even before the audit takes place. So economic operators that are interested in becoming RSB certificate holders, they need to conduct due diligence right at the beginning of their application process. And we do this by requiring economic operators to conduct these two layers of due diligence that we call the self-risk assessment and the screening exercise. The self-risk assessment is conducted through this risk assessment tool that we provide economic operators, and it will help identify what is the risk associated to this economic operator, their operations and their supply chains, and it would also inform what is the audit frequency necessary to audit this operator. So we want to make sure that we are investing additional resources in terms of auditing in the areas and operations where we identify a higher risk. Then there's another layer of due diligence that is through the risk screening tool, where we are asking economic operators to evaluate themselves against the RSB principles and criteria and to identify any potential non-compliances that it could be with regards to these principles and criteria. If you don't know this, the principles and criteria are the RSB backbone. They are our ultimate social and environmental values through these 12 principles that we want to ensure that are implemented through our standards, our requirements, and our overall certification process. So we're asking companies to evaluate themselves through this checklist and to make sure that if there's any risk that could be associated to the potential non-compliance of any of these 12 principles, that they also identify a risk mitigation tool or action that can be then addressing that risk. Those risk mitigation actions then need to be summarized in a management plan that is dedicated to the RSB certification process, which is the environmental and social management plan. And this is then audited by our auditors as part of the audit. And all of this happens even before the auditor goes on sites and conducts the regular auditing process, where they will, of course, be looking into the greenhouse gas emission reductions, the overall systems for traceability, and the ultimate sustainability in the sourcing. So we consider our approach to certification to be very robust from the angle of risk mitigation and due diligence, and we are very proud that when we welcome economic operators in our certification system, we already have this level of assurance that endorses that their practices are aligned with our principles and criteria. Another area where RSB is really standing out as a certification system is in the approach we have to auditing. So most of the certification schemes out there are basing their auditing process on the concept of limited assurance. This is enabling a reduced level of assurance, is based on auditors' approach to auditing in the seeking for confirmation of absence of issues. So basically, when an auditor is going on site for their audit, they're looking to confirm that there's no evidence that would suggest that there are any problems. So they're just ruling out potential issues at the economic operator operations or their supply chains. So the audit scope, of course, still requires a set of documentation review and samples that need to be cross-checked, but this is relatively narrow compared to the approach that we implement in the RSB. In RSB, we're bringing the certification approach to a whole other level. We're basing the audit process in the concept of reasonable assurance, And while this is not endorsing this or providing this absolute level of assurance, it's providing a much higher level of assurance than it would just by implementing limited assurance. We're asking auditors to, when they go on the audit, to look for positive statement of compliance, so they no longer have to just rule out that there's no problems associated to the company, but in fact, they need to find the evidence that will prove that there's compliance with the certification requirements based on a reasonable level of evidence. What this means is that the certification process is a lot more diligent, and it's also a lot more work for auditors, because they need to extensively review documentation, verify it, cross-check it, including the procedures, testing of transactions at the economic operator level, look into the balances provided by the company, conduct interviews to cross-check the information, as well as evaluate the systems that have been implemented by the operator. So there's a very diligent process of the audit that is based on this reasonable assurance approach. And we are very proud that this is the basis of our certification system, because it's contributing to the robustness of our system, and also to making sure that our operators are aligned and operating in line with our values from a social and environmental perspective. Another area of work where we are very proud in RSB is in the appointment of Sahoma Climate. Sahoma Climate is our third-party oversight body. They have been appointed as a third-party organization that is supporting in the monitoring and evaluation of the certification body's activities. They evaluate the certification process and ensure that the process conducted by auditors and certification bodies is transparent, that is impartial, that the certification decisions are plausible, that they're based on robust evidence. And when they identify any potential non-compliances, they also support us in building the corrective actions necessary to course correct. So what Sahoma does is they verify a set of documentation, such as audit reports, the greenhouse gas assessment reports, as well as the evidence behind the certification decisions, but they also conduct witness audits to add another layer of credibility. And we, of course, intensify the need for those witness audits when we see that there's further risk associated to specific supply chains. So we are very proud of the work that we do in collaboration with Sahoma Climate, which is bringing this third-party credibility layer into our system. And it's important to say that this is something that RSB has put in place on a completely voluntary basis. This is not a reaction or an attempt to comply with EU RED requirements, but rather RSB investing in credibility and system integrity. So until there, with regards to the system integrity measures that we have in RSB, and I will be now walking you through EU RED regulatory updates, and then I will hand over to my colleague Federico, who will explain how we are integrating this in the RSB certification process. So starting from the very beginning, as you know, in the EU, we are aiming to become a global sustainability leader. As the European Union, we are setting very high level ambitious goals from a climate perspective, attempting to phase out fossil fuels, increase significantly the share of renewable energies, and overall the decarbonization of supply chains. And these are very high level ambitious goals, and they have been also defined in the Paris Agreement commitments. However, these are quite broad and high level goals that we have. And we also need to bring this down to earth to a more practical level where we can really have a roadmap on how we're going to get there. So this is where the work of the European Commission comes in. They set a lot of legislation, directives, as well as other legislation that will support the EU in the process of getting to those high level goals in a practical level. So as you know, the European Commission issued the EU Renewable Energy Directive 2018-2001, RED II, which is the topic of today's discussion. And this directive has the goal of ensuring that at minimum we reach to this energy consumption coming from renewables of 32% by 2030. Just a recap on RED II and what was the main content of that directive. The objective is, as I said, 32% minimum renewable energies by 2030. It was also setting a sub-target for the transport sector, specifically 14% of the energy consumed in road and rail transport by 2030 being from renewable sources. RED 2 is also defining what is sustainable biomass and sustainable biofuels, and is doing so by defining specific sustainability criteria and greenhouse gas emission requirements. And importantly, is also informing which are the economic operators, which are the companies that need to be demonstrating compliance with the Renewable Energy Directive. For the case of biomass plants operating in the solid biomass industry, we are looking into biomass plants of 20 megawatt thermal input or more. These stakeholders will need to ensure compliance with RED 2, as well as their entire supply chains all the way to the origin of the biomass. And in the case of the biogas stakeholders, we're looking into biogas plants of 2 megawatt thermal input or more and their whole supply chains. RED 2 was also informing that as a way of ensuring or demonstrating that you're aligned with RED 2 requirements, that economic operators need to have a third-party certification that needs to be issued by a certification scheme such as the RSB that has the recognition of the European Commission. So we are very proud from RSB that we already have the confirmation from the European Commission for RED 3 certification of compliance as well. We have the scope of agricultural biomass, waste and residues, and we also have the positive technical assessment for co-processing. So we are ready to support operators in this process of getting certified against RED 3. Now, why did we transition into RED 3? Knowing that we are still in the process of implementing RED 2 at the EU level, this is because the EU is now revising all the legislation that relates to climate, energy, and transport. This is part of a larger revision process that's called the Fit for 55 package. And we are wanting to make sure that at the EU level, we have the appropriate legislation that will support the EU in meeting its high-level decarbonization goals, specifically ensuring that we are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by at minimum 55% by 2030. So that's why we are revising all the legislation that pertains to all these different topics, and that includes the revision of RED 2, which is now RED 3, as you know. So I won't go into the details in this slide because I will cover it later. But as you know, the ultimate objective of the revision is to raise the bar. So there's an increase in the demands for economic operators in RED 3 versus RED 2, because that is what is setting the EU to be fit for achieving this decarbonization goal. So the overall energy targets have increased in RED 3, and so has the restrictions around the use of woody biomass from certain particular areas, as well as the expansion of the scope of RED 3 implementation. If you have been following the conversation around RED 2, you probably know that there's been quite a bit of a confusion in the industry because there's not been a consistent implementation of RED 2 in all the member states. So some member states haven't yet transposed RED 2 into their national legislation. There hasn't been an entire endorsement of the certification process in certain countries and industries. So it is a bit confusing. I think that at this point we are transitioning into RED 3, which is a new version of the directive, when we haven't yet achieved that robust implementation of RED 2 at the EU level. So we know that this is a bit of a confusing time for economic operators subject to this directive. And from RSB, we are here to support you in this process of navigating RED 3 requirements, as well as the advancement and the implementation of whatever additional requirements you need to implement to ensure compliance with those directives, as well as the access to the subsidies. A quick timeline on the main dates related to RED 3. It's important that when the RED 3 was adopted, it was the 9th of October 2023. RED 3 entered into force on the 20th of November 2023, and then from there we had 18 months for the transposition of RED 3 until it really enters into force. So we are now looking into the 21st of May 2025, which is the transposition deadline, and currently the date that matters more for everybody in a practical sense. If you didn't follow the conversation behind RED 3 and the rationale for having a new directive or a revised directive, this was a result of strong advocacy efforts from ENGOs, environmental ENGOs, which considered that RED 2 requirements were not sufficient to ensure the sustainability of the biofuels and biomass industry. So that's why we landed with RED 3, which has stronger requirements around nature protection and so forth. And now looking into the main areas or changes in RED 3, as a disclaimer or an important note before I start walking you through all of them, is that a lot of these changes are mainly affecting economic operators that are operating in the electricity heating and cooling supply chains, as well as economic operators that are operating or utilizing woody biomass in their supply chains as well. So if you're a biofuel operator, many of these changes might not be impacting you, which is of course good news. So what are those changes in RED 3? The first one, one of the most important ones, is that we are aiming higher at the EU level. We are now having a higher target of what should be the minimum renewable energy target. This is now 42.5% in RED 3. The target for transport also increases, is now 29% in energy terms. A very important change in RED 3 that will have a massive impact in the electricity heating and cooling supply chains is the expansion of the scope of implementation. So while before biomass plants of 20 megawatt thermal input or more had to demonstrate compliance with RED 2, we are now in RED 3 looking into 7.5 megawatt thermal input or more, which means that there's a lot more economic operators that need to get certified as a way of demonstration of compliance with RED 3. The greenhouse gas saving thresholds have also increased. We are now looking into 80% greenhouse gas savings for the electricity heating and cooling supply chains, 65% for transport biofuels, 70% for RFNBOs and RCFs for transport. So aiming higher in terms of greenhouse gas savings. There's also more efforts and more restrictions around natural protected areas, areas where the biomass should not be harvested from, the so-called no-go areas. And there's an emphasis that primary and old growth forests, high biodiversity value forests, grasslands, heathlands, wetlands, and peatlands need to be protected, and therefore the biomass should not be sourced from there as a way of preserving biodiversity values, as well as habitats where that have a relevant value for carbon sequestration and so forth. Then RED 3 is also enabling further details around sustainable forest management practices and how that should be conducted. And there was also a really big conversation in the RED 3 development, which was related to the cascading use of biomass. The wording that we landed with in the very final version of RED 3 with regards to cascading use of biomass is fairly positive. So there was a lot of concern from economic operators that utilize woody biomass with regards to the initial wording of RED 3. But finally, the wording that we landed is so fairly flexible, and it also continues to support their operations. So if you're not familiar with this principle, the cascading use of biomass is a principle that is requiring for the biomass to be, for the woody biomass to be utilized for its highest economic and environmental value. And it provides a specific hierarchy of use that needs to be followed when they're using the woody biomass. So bioenergy is the second to last use within that hierarchy of use, which means that an economic operator in principle should not be utilizing the woody biomass for bioenergy production unless there's no other use above in that hierarchy. However, in RED 3, the advantage here is that there's a responsibility that is being handed over to member states to define what should be the highest economic and environmental value in their particular context. So it allows for a lot of flexibility to define what the highest economic and environmental value and best use for the woody biomass will be at that member state level. So we don't yet know how it will roll out because it really depends on what member states then define in the next step in the transposition. And then finally, an important area of changes also is around economic support. Some of the feedstocks then end the support that are provided through subsidies, such as, for example, stumps and roots. And then there's changes in the subsidies that are provided to other economic operators, but this is done in a very in a transition process, so there's no immediate impact impacting biomass plants and their supply chains. So until there with the main changes, the one that for sure can be interesting for a lot of the people joining the webinar today is around the Union database. As you know, the Union database is a database that has been developed by the European Commission with the objective of ensuring the traceability of liquid and biogas fuels. And the news or no news in RED 3 is that there's further emphasis around the need for the utilization of the Union database by economic operators to ensure the traceability of their supply chains and the biomass volumes. So we know that this continues to be the direction where the European Commission wants us to head to as an industry. And from RSB, of course, we see this as a credibility tool that can be utilized as a traceability database. So we will be supporting the European Commission in the enforcement of this, and we are also ready to support our economic operators in the use of this database as much as we can. So we are already have uploaded the certificates into the Union database, and we're also engaging with participating operators and third-party organizations to support operators in this approach of using the Union database. We're also in a continuous learning and improvement process of our certification process, and we have implemented several changes and updates into our certification process towards more digitized and automated systems that can also support the Union database use. So those are the main changes for RED 3, and I will now hand over to Federico, who will be walking you through the changes in the documentation.
Thank you, Amparo. Hi, everyone. I'm Federico, I'm Certification Manager here at RSB, and I'm going to dive into the practicalities on what has changed in our documentation and trying to talk a little bit of the changes. First of all, there are no substantial changes in terms of methodology and how things are done from the RED2 to RED3. So this is good news to everyone. And now the first glimpse of the results of what we've been doing for the past months for the recognition processes. We have been confirmed that the European Commission has recognized our current scope, that is agricultural biomass, wastes and residues, in March. So next steps are going to be publication of the documents, the updates of RSB Academy, and so forth. One of the good news that it's still related to RED2, but actually, as it's starting this year, it's related to RED3 now, is the co-processing recognition. So for whoever does not know what co-processing is that when you blend fossil and biogenic inputs in the refinery, and you can have this bio and fossil output. So this is great for this transition period because the sustainability market can use these assets that are already there to produce biofuels. One of the greatly expected news is related to RFNBO and RCFs. We are the last steps of the recognition process, and we expect to have some good news in the next month. For the forest biomass scope, we're still working on it, so the timeline still needs to be defined. So whoever is interested in forest biomass, please reach out to us and we can provide you with further information about this process. The recognition process has started last year in October, and it took a while to work on those because even though there are no substantial changes, it's a lot of document, a lot of definitions and references to change. So it took a while to get the recognition. And the next steps, it's mostly related to building capacity to be able to audit for this new scope and new way of doing. So the RSB Academy is going live with new EU Red content this month, and we are going to publish the documents this month also. So keep an eye on our news, and for every PO, we're going to send you an update email with the link to the new documentation, the new versions. So now diving a little bit more in terms of what actually have changed. So lots of new definitions in the RED3 related to RFNBOs and also related to forest and like old growth forest, heathland, peatland, and so forth. Forest biomass criteria, as Amparo said, related to the cascading principles and related to like broader definition of what no-go areas are and so forth. and for the GHG thresholds that are indeed a big change, but it's more like a change in terms of the result. There aren't changes in terms of how the GHG calculations are done. The methodology has been maintained. There are a little tweak here and there, but it's mostly related to how it's written, how things are stated in the legislation. Verification of compliance with sustainable and GHG emission saving criteria for first gathering points have had like a new possibility of doing this first or second party audits. So it's a good thing for CBs and POs who actually have these value chains. And a big change is the Article 31A. The union database was already in place in the RD2, but like it hasn't started fully yet. And now there's a new whole article stating how things must be done and how this has to be implemented. The UDB is already live, but there's this responsibility for member states to transpose and actually enforce the usage of the UDB. So we are waiting on that, but the things the UDB is already fully functional, and we have supported our POs. All the certificates are uploaded there, and everybody should be testing it. The GHG calculation methodology, as I said, hasn't changed much. There's a little tweak here and there. And for ESCA, I'll talk a little bit more later. And I'm going to provide an overview of the procedures and the standards and how they have changed. So the certification body agreement, we have included the necessity to verify the accuracy of information entered in the UDB. This is an important step for the trust and transparency of the whole value chain. For the traceability procedure, we have updated the references, and we have included co-processing requirements in section 3.5. So whoever is interested in co-processing and all of the requirements, please have a look at there. It's thoroughly explained, and you can reach out to us also. Requirements for accreditation bodies, there's no changes, so good for everyone. The glossary of terms, we have lots of new definitions, so have a look at there. For grievance procedure, there are no changes. For the PO agreement, we have included the necessity to comply with UDB usage requirements. So this has been updated, and for this next cycle, we're gonna reach out to POs to sign this new agreement. For procedure of CBs and auditors, minimal changes, so nothing that worth mentioning. And for the oversight body requirements and responsibilities, no changes also. For procedure for participant operators, risk management, both of them, and soil impact assessment guidelines, no changes at all. For RSB standard advanced fuels, there are minimal changes, but one little tweak is that wastes have zero life cycle emissions, so a little bit changing in the wording there to provide clarity, but the concept is still the same. For the standard for EU market access, new definitions that are complying with the revised definitions for DRD3. Updated GHG thresholds are included in section 7.2. In Annex 5 in the GHG methodology, as I said, there are no big changes in the methodology, but there's a little caveat for biodiversity when using compost and manure for ESCA calculations. And for carbon capture and storage, there's a new limit for 2036. So, well, but we still have time to use this. Specific requirements for RFNBO, RCF, and co-processing have been moved from the standard for EU market access. RFNBOs and RCFs have their own standard now, and the co-processing, as I said, is in the traceability document right now. For still talking about co-processing, we have included 2 proactive guidances in our library. One of them talking about how POs can do 14C tests. That is a requirement for co-processing, and also how to actually calculate GHG emissions and how to allocate this to the bio share of the output. One of the key takeaways right now for everybody is that there is no need for immediate audits. The audit cycle will be respected, so every proof of sustainability that will be issued from the transposing date to the next audit cycle for the POs will remain valid. So this is important. There's no rush to do things. You can just update your things for the next audit that is already probably already planned with your CB. How we are supporting participant operators in the transition. So, as you know, we are pretty close to our POs, and we understand that there's several requirements that still comes from the RED2 that are not clear. So the ESCA, we are going to publish an ESCA guidance. We are updating our GHG calculator tool this year also. We have created a model so companies can keep track of the inputs and outputs for co-processing. The RSB Academy that has been launched last December is aimed to support auditors, POs that want to know better about how to do things. We have direct engagement with the European Commission on RFNBOs right now on a monthly basis, but also in other aspects of the legislation. And we are working right now with a huge focus in digitization and automation, as, like, for example, the UDB requires participant operators to invest time in putting information there, and we are working with service providers to make this task automatic. So these are the main things. As you know, we are close, so please, if you have any questions related to the implementation of RD3 or any requirements, you can reach out to us at certification@rsb.arch. So I hand back to you, Amparo, now, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Freddy. Oops. So some of the main takeaways from today's webinar. One is that, of course, credibility and integrity is at the very core of the RSB system. We explained to you what are the different action areas and work that we are implementing to ensure the credibility of our system. This includes the emphasis in due diligence in the auditing process, having implemented a third-party oversight body that is supporting us in ensuring that the work by certification bodies is done in a transparent and objective manner. The implementation of our audit approach on the concept of reasonable assurance, which requires a very diligent audit undertaken, including a significant revision of documentation and overall the transparency in the certification process. We are very happy that we are ready to implement RED 3 and support economic operators in this process. We have the confirmation from the European Commission already for a couple of months about the green light with regards to agricultural biomass and waste and residues. And we also have the positive technical assessment for co-processing, which we can already start certifying against. And we are currently awaiting for the final confirmation for RFNBOs and CRCFs, which we are confident we will get very soon. So our recognitions are in place, and we also have the appropriate systems to support economic operators that trust the RSB certification system in their process. And then finally, a final takeaway that is not necessarily RED 3 related, but which is very relevant for us, is that we are not just a certification scheme. We also are a membership-based organization. We act as a platform where we bring stakeholders together that are interested in the biofuels and biomass industry. These are representatives of the economic sector from different stages of the supply chain, as well as environmental and social stakeholders, and we bring them together through different events and platforms that we host with the idea of exchanging information and making sure that we bring all the perspectives together. And these people, these members also are informing the strategy of the RSB, also ensuring that we have a balanced reflection of social, economic, and environmental values in our approach. So this is just an invitation for you to consider. If you would be interested in becoming an RSB member, please let us know. So with that said, I think we will go ahead for the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much, Amparo, Federico, for that brilliant presentation. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to jump in chronological order and start with a question that came in from Venkat asking, is RSB going to do GHG emission calculations for the fuel production plant, or fuel producer need to get this calculation submitted, and is RSB going to review them? I think there's a couple of questions in there, Amparo, for you.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So with regards to this point, the first clarification is that the verification is not done by the RSB Secretariat, but this is done by the certification bodies, so the auditors that work for the certification bodies. The verification is done through the concept of reasonable assurance, as we mentioned earlier, so there has to be a cross-verification of the data that pertains to greenhouse gas calculations. How this is organized is that before the audit, the economic operator needs to submit the greenhouse gas calculation to the auditor for verification, so the auditor can prepare ahead of the audit. And during the audit, the auditor will be looking into verifying, one, that as an economic operator, you have implemented appropriately the methodology for the calculation. And then two, they would be cross-verifying the data that you are reporting to ensure the validity and the veracity of that. And they will be asking you during the audit to provide other documentation that would back the final calculation. So that's how they go about that.
Can I just add to this? So the GHG calculations, as Amparo said, are done by the PO. So it can be done by a third company that is specialized in GHG emissions. If it's an off-the-shelf process, you probably can use RSB GHG tool. So the usage of it depends on your relationship with RSB. So if you are interested in it, please reach out to us. And also, if it's not an off-the-shelf process, we support POs with advisory services, with like complex value chains like feedstock eligibility and so forth. So you can reach out to us also.
Thank you so much, Federico and Amparo. Maybe, Federico, you can pop the certification@rsb.org email address into the discussion or the Q&A channel. The next question comes from Gift, this one I can answer. Will the slides be shared after the meeting? Yes, absolutely. The slides, as well as a recording, will be made available to you by the end of this week. Okay, our next question is, what are POs, so what are operators being asked to sign in terms of UDB compliance? Is it different from the European Commission RSB EU RED general requirements, F114, which state that the operator shall enter accurate information into a union database as soon as the database starts operation to ensure transparency and traceability of the feedstock, intermediate, or fuel? I think, Federico, this is one for you.
Yeah, so Patrick, it's almost the same, but with a little bit more like clarity on what it is. So basically that the POs must include all relevant information related to the transactions, like quantity, GHG, emission values, and so forth. So basically it's the same thing that was written in the RD2, but with more clarity and more details.
Thank you so much, Federico. And then I think our last question, unless something else has come through, when will the upgraded greenhouse gas calculation tool be made available?
That will be made available in May. That's our target. Mhm.
In May. Fantastic. Well, I don't see any further questions, so I would like to thank all of our fantastic presenters today. So Elena, Julia, Amparo, Federico, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. It's been fantastic to see such a good response and so many engaged people on the webinar. As always, you can reach out to us directly. Federico has even put the certification team's direct email into the discussion thread, so certification@rsb.org. Please also keep an eye on our LinkedIn channels, where we post a lot of important updates, and on our news site. You are also invited to register to join us at the RSB Innovations meeting happening in Seattle next month in partnership with Alaska Airlines and Boeing, where we're going to be talking a lot about SAF certification in particular, but we'll also be looking at RSB's approach for impact claims as well as book and claim. I've put some of the names of the organizations that you'll meet there on the screen, and we look forward to continuing the discussion there. With that, wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day, a wonderful evening, and invite you to stay in touch with RSB. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.